All right. Ready when you are.
I'm ready.
Okay.
I have some echo, little echo from your side.
Or, okay.
Wait. Put it from my side.
Cool.
All right. It's much better. So the topic of today's webinar is what is the future? And this is not a simple question because future is complex. It is. It has many facets, many sides, and we will try to talk about it and apply to a startup strategy. Someone might have in our audience, and try to find out the common vision of the future, at least here, or few visions of the future that can be different, but still you need to find somebody that share this vision of the future, right? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it sounds like there's a little reverb, but the commenters seem to be saying that the sound quality is good. So I'm wondering if it's on my end. But your voice sounds a little distorted to me.
How about now?
Yeah, that actually sounds better. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. Please go on.
Yeah. So the future are complex. If we talk about the future as a subject, what it is, right? So even at this point, it's complex. It's not what usually said. It's not what usually presented at the future. It's not the regular conversation that we have, right? So I'd like to talk about different aspects of a future. Well, I found it like 12 important aspects and discuss it with you because you're a presidential candidate from Transhumanist Party. So you probably know things or two about the future.
Yeah, and this is a serious concern. A lot of people in forecasting and futurism studies, there's a tendency toward far futurist thought experiments, and anything that we can do to root this in present day realities and better position ourselves to be working towards near term initiatives. And I think that these 12 habits of highly effective futurists that you've described and we've discussed before are a very good way of looking at this. There are, for example, there is not a lot we can say by present day standards about the not too distant future. This term, the foreseeable future, is kind of it's a misnomer because there's relatively little that can be foreseen there. And so this first point of future developments, I think I look forward to a day, hopefully in the very near term, where that will not be the case. Just as the 2010s is described as a decade that was transformed by smartphone type technology, the 2020s are described as a decade that will be transformed by many things, including quantum computing, from which may derive some powerful predictive algorithms. And predictive algorithms generally might allow us in the coming decade to be able to, for example, predict the weather far better than we are able to today. Now, the world of human affairs is a little bit more capricious in some ways than the weather. But so we might not have this problem of the foreseeable future being a misnomer in 10 years' time or so, but it is something that we should discuss now. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on how we can have a little more clarity on that subject.
Okay.
And from the commenters. Yes. So that this discussion of I think all of these points are quite rightly also revolving around business development and startups. And I think that this is the best way to be thinking about these things. We don't. People are not generally in futurism studies for their own amusement. They want to see how the marketplace can be the starting point for these developments.
Okay. So what I see about the future is we will get in the future anyway. The only question for the company or for the person is in what form. Either alive and close to the vision of the mass or of the vision of the niche, or dead or decomposed, right? So there's a different different type of behavior that will allow you to get in the future and predict how mass will react to your proposition, to your product, to your service. And according to this, the future, your future actions can be planned. So if you want to get in a distant future, plan for the distant future, not for the short-term profits, right? All the time we hear that we don't hear this type of thinking, right? So what we hear in the marketing messages is we have some product, and this product will like generate a lot of money, or this product is the future itself, right? Our company, our product, our service is the future, but without understanding what future is, mid-term or long-term, you cannot really understand what the product must be, right? One of the important aspects of future is developing. That's why you cannot tell the future will be. You can only tell the future will probably be for some group at some period of time. Because every technology, every product has its own life cycle. There's time where people no idea what this product is, what the service is. There is time that is conceived by the creators. There's time it is produced and put on the market. And there's time where the market have a good understanding what the product is, what the service is. And then something happened and it became like old and morally old. It's not old itself. It's not like we cannot use steam engines these days. We can, but there's no real application for them, except in Hollywood movies or tourist, So without defining the period of time when this product will be used, we cannot really tell in what future this product will be useful, and for what group, for what context, like larger context, economic context. This is what is really absent in modern narrative, in modern marketing messages that we hear all the time. Because normally there's not a lot of time and not a lot of attention every customer have to really get to know your product, right? It's sometimes like 20 seconds, 30 seconds of advertisement at best, maybe like 5 seconds to decide this is for me or this is not for me, and then like scroll down later. So what do you think about this aspect?
Yeah, there's quite a few things that we could say about this. When we're looking at people who make a living as trend watchers or analyzing the market, they're quick to point out that all of these technologies that are going to be transformative in the next decade, they already exist in prototype form. They're already largely been test marketed, and so these product lines, for example, the brain-computer interfaces of a more powerful kind than you and I have experienced. Other kinds of more advanced interfaces, the kind that we've actually, we've discussed at some length, but the newer forms of this, it's well understood that these things will be commonplace in 5 years, and that these rollouts will occur over some period of time. But it's difficult to predict, as you said, the degree of market saturation, where that a product might sort of catch fire in one region or one country relative to another. Just as people, when in the months or years, the months prior to Google Glass being rolled out, people thought that this would become a far more commonplace product than it is. There are other products, that have been a little bit more of a surprise in their success. So it's interesting to try to, people have an active interest in investing in startups to try and understand this. And it's important in thinking about human affairs more generally, and policy matters as well. All of the things. I think that a good example is how quickly the Starlink system and competing systems from Google or Amazon could be implemented and become more utilized, because this changes initiatives at the municipal level and at the national level to providing low-cost services of these kinds. If this is provided in a much cheaper way through this network of mini satellites, then costly municipal initiatives to provide that same service should probably not be undertaken or spearheaded in the next few months. But if this is going to prove to be some kind of vaporware, then we should continue to support those kind of initiatives. So this is a problem with prognostication. And this uncertainty. One of our commenters says, "Do we have some other examples of future disruptive products in these kinds of economies and in human affairs at large?" What do you think? What are your ideas for these most disruptive future products in the coming years, Alexey?
I think that we need first to understand more aspects of what future is before really start to talking. Because if we just start from our understanding, from our let's say vulgar understanding, right? We are not prepared before we know what the future is. We're not prepared to talk about it because it must be thought out. Like this period of time when technology will exist, in the context of it, imply that every system is exists in its own environment, in its own supplying system, and its own design system. So the design tools and the production tools for the system will be changing with a lot with in the same time the environment of use of this technology will be changing. It means when you plan to do something on like this type of chip or this type of software, like in 5 years, you must understand that will be completely another platforms, another software, and another understanding of this of the utility of the whole system itself. In the interconnection with the other systems. So everything will change basically for you, right?
And your second point.
And yeah. Second point is like if you cannot do something right now, by drawing the trends, you can understand that you can or cannot using this like today trends. And it also easily kill your technology if you develop it for one generation of components, one generation of chips, and another generation coming, and you cannot like migrate your system to it. And it takes time. It takes a lot of efforts because it's rarely like backward compatible, compatible with old versions. Sometimes it's easier to just drop it and like Apple do all the time, drop the old platform and release a new. It's not the compilation issue. It's a new possibility, new architectures, like a lot of new components of environment. That system exists, your system, your future system. So the in the future everything will be different, is well underlined by Hollywood movie when we see a piece of old technology showing alongside with a completely new technology, like space travel with a possibility to jump between point in space and time. It doesn't imply that you are fighting with a swords or something like this. It just doesn't compatible. These two aspects of the future, they're not compatible with themselves in technology. It's happened all the time. Because as a sci-fi author, you're supposed to get something familiar for person, right?
Yes.
In order to
anchor
the understanding, like build a common base, build the common ground, right? And it's not about the future. It's about some like parallel universe.
Yeah. The science fiction writers are literally taught this. They have to focus on one dramatic plot conceit and not insert many dozens or hundreds, because that becomes too confusing for the reader or the watcher of the film to follow. So they have to stick to one, and that's that makes sense. But it doesn't. So you mentioned Star Wars in the article, and we talked about that before. Another one of my favorite films of the 1980s is RoboCop, and in RoboCop there is this autonomous weaponry that's a dramatic departure from the technology of that time. And yet, in every other respect, the interfaces and algorithms in that future world seem to very much like the mid 1980s, and as do the aesthetics of the film. So that's an effect that we see time and again in these kind of narratives. But this kind of anachronism is also something in thinking about startups and the business landscape of the coming years, where we can't predict the ways in which we are thinking by present standards will be anachronistic by the standards of even just those few short years from now, as you mentioned. And again, I would some of that it's because this is an open question. For example, we mentioned Starlink. The rollout of something like that and its success could very much affect the rollout of other things like augmented reality, or things that would rely upon that the kind of bandwidth that's necessary for that kind of Internet of Things sort of experience. And the same thing with people's interest in 5G technology. There's a lot of pushback right now from in the popular imagination, unfortunately, against 5G technology. It's described as something in the minds of low information consumers, described as something dangerous that doesn't seem to really reflect too much of the reality. But enough of a pushback in that direction could affect the timeline of Internet of Things technologies being used in a significant way.
Agree. Let's jump to the third point, third aspect of the future. which is uniformity. Does the future uniformly distributed on Earth? And where is it? And we will see that is really developing in some centers, and other planets just don't know about it. Other planets just living in other like news cycles and other cultural environment, and doesn't follow really the reality of the industry, except maybe some PR, like really resonant PR stunts, and some Hollywood movie appearances. And it is really widespread. It's not just like simple case. It's how we all working, how our brain works. Our brain works on stereotypes, and stereotypes are the thing of the past, right? So we only can judge a technology according to what we saw a long time ago. It doesn't mean it is the same thing right now in the research lab, right? So this non-uniformity and this complex structure, network type structure that develop in this technology makes it hard to really understand what's going on. My personal experience is that I spent like 1 year to understand how like particular technology, particular group of companies, group of scientific institutions collaborating to create, in my case, the model of human, the mathematical model of human, to predict behavior of an organism without actually doing any intervention or any without giving them the any pharmaceutical intervention or physiological. So this happened because at the first glance we only have like most widespread piece of information, and it's PR, and it's not reflecting the real situation. While starting to talk with some people, they all also know only their sector. They part of the network. They know only a few people. They can point. They can remember at the moment of conversation and tell you, "Oh, you can talk with this guy." And it happens that they also don't know a lot, you know. So it always like Rubik cube, when you don't see the other sides of the cube, right? You only see your side, because it's like the whole thing, the whole system is global. Like literally, this network of researchers there in United States, in Canada, in Japan, in China. So even if you visit a few conferences, it's also the question of scientific and technological fashion, that you're not seeing the whole picture. You're only seeing what is really trending, what is really like in fashion right now in this industry.
Yes, and it's a problem for people thinking about accelerationism, because this is something that is unfortunately associated with futurists and transhumanists. Is that there's an idea that we are another popular idea with those low information consumers of that we are have some elitist agenda, and unfortunately that's not all futurists are are uniformly broad-minded in these ways, and so that fear it does reflect some certain parts of our community, but just since the advent of the networked era. For example, there's a almost fourfold increase in gross world product gross domestic product in the world. In the world, and if you look at, for example, places that are more impoverished, the African continent, for example, which is not uniformly impoverished, it's kind of a little bit silly to imagine that some of this enormous continent with so many great cities is this sort of monoculture, as people sometimes imagine it. But nevertheless, it is relatively impoverished, but it has also seen that actually more than fourfold increase in its GDP in that same period of time, these last 30 years. So while there's still a tremendous disproportion there, the whole of Africa being about 1.5 trillion GDP. That's a fraction of what the North American continent is, or the European continent. But the growth has been, in fact, larger, and that's also reflected in the numbers of people who now have access to potable water and food. Those people at those extremes are much, much lower. There was many billions of people before the networked era who were not getting clean water and enough food. And that number is now below 1 billion. And we expect that in the course of this decade, it will be growing closer and closer to zero with each passing year. So there's some of these things in a larger sense that can be said to be fairly even in the way that they are rolling out, but not even enough. And we have to also hope, in thinking about the marketplace, be looking at the ways in which those trends can be predicted, and the ways in which we can anticipate and see that these new technologies are used for human development and the betterment of the human race.
Yeah, you gave us a great example of a future from the past. So, like, clean water is definitely a technology, but this is technology maybe from 19th century or even 18th century. Remember, people at that time used a lot of alcohol instead of clean water because clean water was inaccessible. So the only way to actually disinfect water was to drink alcohol, drink wine.
Drinking beer was a lot safer.
Yeah, drinking beer was a lot safer than water. Yeah, exactly. And it was like a question of life and death sometimes. So this non-uniformity still exists, and it always will exist, because also, like, let's jump to the next point, right? The future is not, if the future is here, we can say the future is here, but just not for you particularly. What does it mean is the life cycle of development, the design time, the production time is much longer than we can imagine. It's in decades. It's in maybe multiple decades. And also, because of the distribution of these technological centers, of the like physical distribution, you cannot really access to every new development, every new technology, every new application. The number of actual application in iPhones is in 100,000, right? How much you have it installed in your phone? So the future is here, but not for you, means you cannot apply all the technology that is here, and also you cannot apply it because in a prototype stage that can like take decades between commercial availability, appearance and commercial availability, you cannot really access it. You cannot use it if you're not in the development team. And you are not in most of the development teams, of the research teams of the world, right? And nobody is. So these technologies already exist. Researchers can use it, but nobody in particular can actually use this technology, right? So the appearance of some technological parameter, the achievement of it, right, is in another measurement, another scale than the mass adoption, that your personal adoption. If the technology exists, even if in commercial prototype, it doesn't mean it exists for everybody because of previous point, right? Because of non-uniformity. So the technology is here, but not for them, and will not for them, for the rest of humanity, right? For those who suffer from like basic problem, right? Much more like fundamental problems.
Yeah, and a good way of looking at that, which we discussed before and is mentioned in the article on the subject, is that in that pre-networked era, my use of technology was different, maybe more advanced than that of my mother, for example. And even though there's been this dramatic increase, there's still that difference in distribution. My mother uses technology in a little bit different way than I do, and in this case, a little bit less. I think this is also an opportunity to call back another question from another of the participants in the discussion. Jordan Gillard says, "What are our impressions of Internet of Things and smart cities?" This question has a lot to do with how people approach these emerging technologies where they live. People advancing the cause of smart cities, people demanding and clamoring for Internet of Things. This has an effect on how quickly these things come and how uniformly these things come. So, for example, something like Starlink has the ability to facilitate some kinds of leapfrog effects in the developing world, allowing people to have access to a lot more bandwidth than they have now. A lot of these countries don't have very reliable home internet, and they're relying solely on cellular networks that are one or two generations behind the standards of the developed world, and so that diminishes the quality of work product that people in those urban environs are able to be doing. And so these kind of increases and these kind of what people expect and what people demand has a direct effect on how quickly these things happen and how uniformly these things happen across continents and across societies.
Yeah, I just don't overestimate the standards of the Western world, because when I'm living in New York City, the budget of New York City is like $92 billion a year. So this is like cash money we receive as a municipal entity and have to spend in a relatively small territory, so $92 billion is probably over the bottom 100 states, and because territory is small, like a lot of things can happen here with this $92 billion, right? But it doesn't happen. When I came out on the street, I see a lot of garbage on the sidewalks. When I came down to subway, I still see 19th century technology that come back to the probably first century technology, because it's still the same chariot with the same size of wheels, with the same like type of propulsion, except there's no horse and there's an electric motor, right? And it's inherited from like chariot type of vehicles, right? You still have wheels, you still have the particular side, and because of that, you cannot have it smaller, or you cannot have it personalized. You only have it centralized, and like any modern so-called modern subway system, right? Also, it's a physical control over people to access, and it was here probably from the 50s, 60s. All these turnstiles. The regular cars are also from 19th century. They still designed to kill people. They still designed to be controlled by humans, and humans are relatively good in driving anything, right? So only because the traffic is terrible in New York City, there is so little accidents, car accidents. Otherwise, it will be a much bigger numbers. So we still have relatively dangerous transportation system. You can fall in a subway. You can be stuck, be under the car, and you still inhale the carcinogenic products of oil engines.
Yeah, 35,000 people a year die directly from this problem in the United States
This is because
of user error in
the
this design
system
set of design.
at the time. Yeah, exactly. This is because the system of the time doesn't imply like chariot and horse, doesn't imply that there is any automation except like human driving, right, or human riding. So we still the regular car, they can drive any direction in New York City. Some terrorists use this possibility, and there's no physical limits to it. There's no. It's not even railroad, so they can leave their actual position, and so this 30,000 is just part of a problem, because actually everything is linked to the transportation. Every other system is linked to the logistic systems, like road infrastructure, and it looks like it designed to be split on multiple, to be ineffective, designed to be ineffective by design, as we speak, right? So
yeah,
we cannot have automatic system until it's over complex, like right now with AI, object recognition, and we cannot have garbage outside. I mean, we have it outside on the streets, instead of having the special transportation that doesn't imply appearing it on the sidewalks and producing the smell, producing the increasing rats population and stuff like this. So this inheritance, this commercial immortality of some technology is also the thing that we don't really plan in the future, but it happens, right? It happens all the time in transportation, much less in telecom, but still, yes, still here. Telecom is a great example of leapfrogging, of disruption, but still it is stuck on forms. It is still stuck on smartphone form, or it is stuck on hand holding form. So it is a great example of faster moving, not the motion that will appear with singularity events, with the acceleration of the future, right? This acceleration is the next point. The future is accelerating, right? And it's the basis of everything is changing. Everything in the future for your startup and product will be changing, because the change itself is a product of change, right? The change is changing. The design system is changing. The design systems becoming faster. The communication are faster. and the spread of tech is faster. And it's really like it's really in IT and in AI. It's really mind blowing actually. So people start panicking. Like Elon Musk is panicking because of AI. A lot of transhumanists also understand that there's no time. The time is out. So we just like it's a miracle that somebody didn't have this weaponized AI yet applied on them.
Some,
What?
I mean, some of that fear is a protectionist impulse on the part of these concerns, right? So there's an AI safety initiative in Los Angeles. That's some of these PayPal mafia guys sort of spearheaded that. But there, it's not entirely clear how much, for example, a recursively self-improving algorithm would be an existential risk to all of us, or how much it's an existential risk to Peter Thiel's micromanaging of a lot of a certain percentage of the marketplace. That problem is if it is only that the latter thing and not the former thing, then we have to assume that this could be very good for people. I mean, if there's anything that you could be doing to advance a recursively self-improving algorithm that would have tremendous implications for human development and quality of life. Just even if it does affect certain aspects of the marketplace much sooner than others. So, for example, you mentioned the public transportation systems in New York City and ways in which they are sort of techno-sluggish. There's a couple of things that I think that we should try to unpack there in discussing that, namely these kind of ideas of that are the techno-sluggishness of these kind of public initiatives is a very real concern. If we see acceleration effects to a higher and higher degree, but public initiatives are not adopting those technologies as quickly as the private sector, then there is a good case to be made there for some kind of privatization there. But we also see privatization having being a major contributor to income inequality and to its own set of concerns about the misuse of those funds. And that, on the other hand, we have in looking at something like New York public transit system, for example, there are a number of public transportation systems that have adopted a zero fare approach, a zero fare public transport, because a lot of the fund that required to administer these systems, a lot of it is in this sort of fair idea of charging users. That does amount to an effective poor tax, and it is something that's building a degree of dysfunction into those systems. So removing some of that, and also embracing emerging technology. You mentioned that the subway is not as safe as it could be. It also could be a lot more automated, and that would allow for the move toward those things becoming more of a public good, something like a zero fare public transport. But it also has implications for labor, for workers. As does all automation, we have to consider that there's a lot of people who, 40% of people are in the next decade conceivably having their livelihoods automated out of existence. It's why people like Andrew Yang and Zoltan Istvan and myself are proposing basic income schemes to address that. And we have to consider all of these things, and mostly consider what the main point of this part of your piece, which is that these things are not going to be completely even, and we have to adjust accordingly ourselves.
I agree. I just see the limitation of case scenario, like if we look at some cases from the past, I see its limitation in projecting the future, right? We think that there is a lot of, also because of this commercial immortality and special interest, economic interest that really stop the progress in some term. Like another example of this progress deceleration is how transportation affects real estate and real estate price. Actually, all the city try to be as much centralized. We have skyscrapers pretty much in every big city, but this doesn't happen just we need it, right? It doesn't happen because of a need. It happens because of the transportation system is so slow, ineffective, and time-consuming, and costly that we need these skyscrapers. We need this centralization there, right? We need this centralization of pretty much everything from energy supply to product supply to retail in one place. If I personally have a transportation mean a vehicle that transport me like a general speed of like 50 miles an hour, I'll be happy to live in suburbs of New York City. But right now, in order to get out of New York City, I need to spend like just like 1 hour to get to the train station, right? There's no way I can jump out of island of Manhattan. So this system really decelerate the progress and accumulate the value, accumulate the monetary value and power in hands of policymakers that really support the same old system. Like right now, MTA, it's a structure that supports metropolitan transportation in New York City. It received like $52 billion. $52 billion is an insane amount of money. But because the system is old, it needs this money just to support its aliveness, its regular function. Nothing will happen with the main transportation parameters, like the time I wait for trains and the time I will spend in a subway to get from point A to point B. So this $52 billion actually like proposed for next 5 years will not go to actually develop new transportation systems. They will not make the transportation system more network-like, than as it is right now, as a pretty centralized that I need to go to the subway station, then wait there, and so
there are some municipalities
pretty much the same. It's really centralized, and because of highways, and you cannot change anything. You just stuck in traffic. You can buy yourself a bike, of course, but it's not solution for the most people. This is not the reliable way to transport yourself, with any freight,
Yeah. And earlier in this talk we discussed this sort of anachronistic effect, this situation where we would see incompatible technologies possibly, and in these some of these advanced algorithm frameworks that we've discussed, predictive algorithms or recursive self-improving algorithms, or some kind of artificial general intelligence. This will affect the sort of the tech marketplace substantially far more quickly than the kinds of things that we're talking about in the bricks and mortar world. And so we will see that kind of anachronism in this decade as well, where it seems, it seems strange that we can generate so much work product now because of this advanced algorithm breakthrough, but that hasn't really affected certain functions of cities. And also, when you see virtualization to a very high degree, where people are becoming more immersed in augmented reality and so forth, some of those bricks and mortar initiatives, for example, the rebuilding of highways, the rebuilding of sidewalks, might become less important in people's minds because they're using the virtual analogs so much more. And in some cases, that might be rather unfortunate. It certainly might not contribute to the beautification of those urban environments. But I think that how that those differences there describe one of the next points in the piece, which is future shock, and people having difficulty adopting to rapid change. For example, some kind of accelerationist effect or singularitarian effect. This has we already see a fair part of this in the world of social media today. The idea of that a lot of facts are called into question sometimes. There's social engineering of other kinds that contribute to unrealities like this, and that's not going to go away. That problem is going to, in certain areas, be getting worse. So, what is your impressions of future shock problems, and maybe how we can anticipate those concerns?
Well, the understanding of future shock levels concept is not widespread yet. And if we just make it more public discussion about what kind of future you want to live with in comparison in the main concept of future shock levels, it will also provoke a lot of changes in budgeting. So by knowing that actual technology is so important in many ways, and actual social system is so ineffective, so we just need to drop it as it is, and just wait to the particular technology to be developed in the future, so we can leapfrog ourselves, so disrupt our social our current social possibility to actually apply these technologies. What can, like, future shock level, what it is, right? For some, it may be like new concept. It isn't. It was proposed
shock level 0, shock level 1. Yes.
Yeah, from shock level 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it was proposed by Robin Toffler and developed by a few others, futurologists, transhumanists. What it means is future shock level 0 is the technology that's already exists, but you still like afraid of it, and it exists in widespread and commercially available, but you somehow don't use it. It's not comfortable for you to actually apply it or touch it. Like I saw it when my parents first bought the computer. It was probably 10 years ago. Just be able to talk via Skype with me and my sister. So they were really really afraid to break something, really like uncomfortable to use it. And future shock level 1 imply technologies that already exist, but not in mainstream media, not in mainstream like commercial availability, mainstream advertisement, something like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if we're rounding down, we could say that we are at this sort of shock level zero now, if I'm not mistaken. And it's also fair to say that in the course of this decade, we're going to be approaching this shock level one kind of paradigm. And the differentials there in terms of like cognitive dissonance and people's a lack of cultural literacy on these subjects, it has dramatic implications for all aspects of the marketplace. Some of those things are more pronounced. So, for example, if a set of products is not adopted, like in the way that we describe Google Glass being very useful, but people having sort of uncanny valley type reactions to it, or other kinds of future shock kind of reactions to it, that is sad. That product is not more commonplace. But another type of technology, for example, in emerging biomedicine, that could lead to a longevity escape velocity or radical life extension. If people have that sort of cognitive dissonance, if they have that sort of willful ignorance on this subject, that will effectively be a public health crisis. If we can achieve a radical life extension, but people don't believe that we can and are not taking an active interest in seeing those things implemented in public health initiatives or public health services of a public or private kind, then that is effectively a sort of soft genocide. That is 110,000 people die every day of old age. And if that becomes preventable, but people are not convinced that that's the case, then that is very sad. So these future shock type effects have very real implications to varying degrees in all of these features in the marketplace.
Yeah, I agree, and it's just first two applications. Life extension is still future shock level 2 or 3, and because of a future shock level concept was developed in the 70s, it's still valid if we like move the particular technologies through it and apply future shock level 0 as what exists right now, like smartphone, like personal computers, like personal medical devices, sensors, and things like this. So if we look at it as a general like description of a stereotypic behavior of customers, it's still very valid as a concept, future shock level. At some point, like genetic therapy, personal genomic analysis and projection in terms of functional genetics will be here. The point is it will pass all the future shock levels, right? From the point of future technology unexisting and consequences of which we don't really like and don't really think about, to the point it will be like everywhere. And like a lot of questions will be solved and a lot of new problems will appear with this with the genetic modification possibility. Like a few days ago, I saw the news that CRISPR tech was made cheaper by the factor of 1,000 or even 10,000.
Yes.
So the part of CRISPR technology was like $10,000 electric perforator. So we have it, but people find out that regular lighter, regular press lighter, what that do the little spark in your lighter, right? It do pretty much the same job, but for the cost of like 30 cents instead of $10,000. So this is a like dramatic drop for biohacking minded people, it's still the shock level to like an existing thing for the most academic environment, because they work on old technology and on expensive tech. But it's really like wide spreading in a biohacking community that work with genetic modification, because it makes the what price drop means always is you can do much a lot of job for the same buck, for the same amount of money, and accelerate the same process dramatically, because you do parallel experiment, and instead of working with one perforator, you can use a lot of it. So it's really like this quantitative change will like bring us the change in the quality of the results, because you can like multiply and change much more genes and see and have like better results in general. Like even if end products they are not always good quality in terms of CRISPR is not that specific, as a tech.
Mm-hmm. And
the number of tries, the number of repetitions is much better. That it solved this problem. You can functionally like then sort the results.
Yeah, that diminished that dramatic decrease in the cost of something, the purchasing power of a dollar being so much higher in terms of the CRISPR technology is. It's the most important factor in thinking, I think, about accelerationism, and it's why that feature of something like a recursively self-improving algorithm is so important, because that is basically a situation where work product now drops to near zero in cost for most things, and for all of the things that matter. Many of the things that matter in the marketplace, and that makes it much easier to see other improvements in these parallel markets, and certainly makes it much easier for people to expect to be successful sole proprietors or build cooperative businesses or partnerships, as opposed to being employed by larger concerns. A good example of that is the Google Assistant platform that was tested and is now used on most of our cell phones. I have a Pixel Google phone, which uses it quite well. But that capacity of this Google Assistant to be making phone calls on your behalf that are indistinguishable, that can do basic sort of assistant work, call and order a pizza for you, or call a cab, and interact with the front end of other businesses. That free front end of a business, that reflects a lot of ease of access for the ordinary consumer in starting a small business of their own. If everybody has a free front end of their business, that makes running a small business a lot easier. And that effect is dramatically amplified when you see any sort of moves towards general intelligence or recursive self-improving algorithms, and it is a very exciting prospect. I want to go back to the SL0 and SL1, the shock level discussion for just a moment, because I like to think about this. I think a good parallel sort of analogy here is generations in phone, where, for example, we're at the precipice of 5G, and 5G reflects some pretty transformative technologies, advanced interfaces that are substantively better. For example, full and constant streaming augmented reality, and the use of powerful digital assistants and chatbots of the kind that we've alluded to, and IoT technologies. What is 6G? The sort of Black Mirror-esque continuations of this. Those chatbots being able to do real work product on your behalf, and those interfaces becoming dramatically smaller and more integrated, brain-computer interfaces of a shocking kind in that 6G. And then sort of SL4 parallel, the shock level 4 parallel, would be 7G, which is a technological singularity, the effects of which are wholly speculative. We don't know what that exactly looks like, but we do know that seems to be coming in 20 odd years or so.
I agree. We probably in terms of showing how to plan your product or company to the mid or far future, we probably need to jump to shock level 2 at least, because like even if shock level 1, like mass virtual reality, mass robotization and economy, and mass e-commerce is still ahead. It's really like these markets are really like today markets. So what's like shock level 2 proposing us is physical immortality, gene modification, and all kind of concepts like gender and limitation of personal limitation, cognitive limitation, interstellar or interplanetary trips. This is like if you see the difference between current markets, current technology of shock level 1 and this concept that how can you be prepared to this type of markets, right? How can you build a future product for this period of time, for this range, right? Here we see that like 4G, 5G, it doesn't really that matter, it doesn't really matter. We have physical immortality on 4G or 5G networks, right? Because it's like completely different industry, completely different type of technology. And the question of physical immortality is a good of a human is a good question, because there is like 5 or 6 pretty much independent direction to it. So one of them is shock level 0. It's gerontology. It is a pharmaceutical way to change organism, which is still not working, but it's still independent from every other direction that we have toward this goal, toward this existence and commercial availability. Another one, the brain scans, either destructive or non-destructive, invasive or non-invasive, and invasive and non-invasive brain scans. In order to understand the structure of a brain, the architecture of neuronal connections, or level down to the synaptic concentration that currently define how activated your brain are. This is pretty like different technology. So what we see in Elon Musk's presentation of Neuralink is completely different technologically from what other people like Carbon Copy company do. Mm-hmm. And this has also different underlying sectors of economy. Scanning, destructive scanning is much closer to the microscopy, nanotoms, microtoms, medicine, current application of it than Elon Musk application. That is electrode side, robotics, chip size, chip architecture. So this is because both of these directions, technological directions, are actually supported by existing industries with $100 billion yearly sales. We can predict they will compete in the future too. So they exist right now. The very existence of this technological direction of these markets are made possible because of regular demand, regular persons' needs, and also competition on the market. So you cannot sell like previous generations products on this market. You need to actually push yourself in a competition, in a modern competition, market competition. So nothing like technological is here. It's only like monetary question of survivability of a company. So this is like, even if you want to stop the progress here, you cannot. Your company just will die, and the whole system is designed. The whole system on the level of states, on the level of companies, on the level of sectors of economy is competing.
Yes. It's
so we have like objective push from the position we don't imply from the sides of a game. We don't even know who they are. No, they still do they things. They still make progress in chips, in architectures, in imaging technology, microscopy, computing ability to understand according to slice what is connected to what, computer vision, and then modeling of neuronal structure. If we talk about like destructive scanning of the brain, it still exists. This whole sector, this push will exist further. So that's why the future is accelerating. This is one of the reasons. It's not like some advanced progressive people that really decide to manage the future in particular direction. It is moved by greed and by the need of paying your personal mortgage and to be someone in a society, in the modern society. So we can be pretty relaxed here. It's still moving.
Yes. And some of those uncertainties, for example, what is the best approach? What will prove in time for the marketplace to be the best approach to reverse engineering the human mind, the kind of things that you're describing, or brain-computer interfaces, very closely related neurotech fields, in the long term, rather closely related. With the same sort of advanced algorithms that would, for example, generate dramatically more work product, might relatively quickly settle some of these open questions as to what will prove to be the best approach to these things. It's fascinating to consider, and I hope that we are right in thinking as accelerationists and in thinking in terms of a technological singularity. But all as in all things, the proof is in the pudding. I think in discussing the piece and these elements, we cannot discuss a future shock without discussing the nature of the networked world and the new sphere, so to speak, and how emerging culture which derives from emerging technology, how some of that could prove to be quite shocking to people. The sort of moves that could derive from something like what we mentioned, Neuralink company, Neuralace technology, a science fiction concept only a decade ago, now a real world concept. Emerging technology therein could change ideas around collectivism and shared experience, enhance the people's interaction within the new sphere, ultimately accelerating something like an omega point, something like a higher level of connectivity between people. And that is something that was discussed in your piece. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this on this networked world, and particularly perhaps in the next decade.
So the network is the next point. The network distributive character and globality. For me, it means that the general understanding, it means that doesn't matter what happened in some particular node of this network, in some particular place. It is still the function of global communities, that exist in different countries and compete between each other. It also means that, like, there is no way to the distributiveness. There is no way to actually influence the progress because this a lot, because these possibilities are visible to many people. Even if you start some trend, right? It is still based on a lot of development made by other people outside of your company or your country. This is network character, right? So the leadership also in a network structure is different because, like, you leader one time, then you fall because it's some part of your network, like educational system or economic situation in your country, or general culture in your country degrade or became more favorable to the part of civilization you actually participating. It means like for me, I'm from Soviet Union, ex-Soviet Union, and it was pretty developed country at the end of the 80s, technologically developed, and nobody thought that it will like collapse like few years later. At that point, like 4 times the economy that it had, and also because Soviet Union was pretty voluntaristic, it can really achieve some voluntary, some strange economic parameters or strange technological things that West cannot did, at this point. So this is Soviet space program, Soviet nuclear program are based on. So if you really decide and concentrate the efforts by taking resource from regular people, right? You can really like be better at something. It's like China right now. China can actually allow yourself a large scale programs because of this. Large scale and focused on like AI, on robotics, on even taking over infrastructures, like yesterday infrastructures, right? in Africa or in Asia is still able to do it, and another country can do it. No, not United States, not Europe as a whole, not Japan. So it is what China and Soviet Union were able to is to build ad hoc networks for the task, and United States did it too with the Sputnik moment, with the American space program. When they saw what Soviet did, they just start to build Silicon Valley to achieve the speed of change. They start to build ad hoc structures like DARPA to really compare in speed of progress in these directions. So these network models will also change, I think, in the future. So they will be much more focused, maybe microstates, maybe not the China size. Because of genetic modification, we will have a lot of ability in hands of small groups. And right now we see that even in China, we are stopped by official judgment on genetic modification. We see ethical committees that incarcerated this geneticists that actually applied gene modification on humans. And I suppose that in some limited space, in some particular states, there will be no such limits, right? Especially what we saw in Nazi Germany, what we saw in place of conflict that can be spatial structure made just for certain goals, right? And because it's a question of a speed of a race, right? Right now, it can be effective, really effective, and dangerous for everybody else, because it's easily, pretty much every modern technology easily weaponized.
Yes. Yeah, this is your piece mentions Eliezer Yudkowsky, and he has a rather tongue-in-cheek assessment of this in describing Moore's law of mad scientists, namely that with every passing year, the cost of building a doomsday device, the cost of an inverse Moore's law kind of tongue-in-cheek Moore's law parallel, but the cost of destroying the entire Earth comes down by some significant number. So the point being that the very same effect that we described in CRISPR, the purchasing power of CRISPR, the purchasing power of $1 relative to these kind of genetic engineering technologies, that has dramatically impactful and good implications for the marketplace of in terms of medicine, but there are risks that derive from this as well, and I think it's sometimes a little bit alarmist to focus on these risks. I tend to think that some of those predictive algorithms will, the predictive algorithms that could derive from quantum computing or other breakthroughs moving us towards some kind of general intelligence. Though it's easier for example, to imagine them being able to predict existential risks deriving from the weather. So for them to pinpoint the next sort of extinction level event of that kind, and then the world of human affairs. The world of human affairs is it's rather arbitrary. You could maybe make a list of things that might happen, but you couldn't predict because there's just the very existence of the prediction, for example, could change the outcome of those predictions. But we will, I think, be able to use advanced algorithms to sniff out some of these human-derived existential risks. And certainly, this is the main argument for a problematic but very real thing in the aughts in the United States, the government surveillance state, as opposed to the corporate surveillance that we've seen in the last decade. But the USA Patriot Act was foisted upon the American people, and they were more or less accepting of it. Not everybody, but a surprisingly large number of people were accepting of it because they were they had a lot of fear of risks of this kind, and in a slightly different context, but more or less the same kinds of things. Non-state actors being able to wreak havoc and cause a lot of deaths, and so that quality of the government surveillance that we saw, emerging 15 years or so ago, the corporate surveillance that we saw dramatically enhanced in the last 5 years or so, and the next step, and I hope more equally or more robust, but maybe also more healthful and respectful of individual rights, a surveillance, a sort of something that's more decentralized and opted into an open society paradigm, or panopticon sort of a move in that direction. But that also hopefully will be able to, in conjunction with predictive algorithms, be able to reduce the likelihood of these human-caused extinction level events. But we really don't know at this time where we are in that doomsday clock, and where and how that might change in the next 10 years. We can imagine, for example, that 4 decades from now, all of those risks will be mitigated, and the only risks that we might have to concern ourselves with possibly will be the ones that we described, the actual acts of God, like things deriving from climate change might be mediated to a higher degree then, but we still will have to know if or when an asteroid might strike Earth and how to respond appropriately to that. But in the near term, we don't know how to deal with these human caused existential risks. And X risk is an important part of these discussions. It's an important part, I think, of talking about the role of the networked world and the role of collectivism versus individualism, an important point in your next point. What is the future of the individual? And I'm not inclined to believe that the individual is at great risk in the coming decades. I think that a happy medium will be found between protecting my own consciousness, my own individuality, and having collectivist effects that are useful to human development or safety. But these are all open questions.
Well, I don't think individual or startup is an actor here at that level. At that level of state surveillance or corporate surveillance, if you don't do this, you're just in less privileged position compared to those who do. So Facebook just don't have a choice not to survey and not to act as a political entity while used both in Russian interference case, or in case of filtering information, or actually blocking or preventing false news. So this is we are just, I don't think individual and startups are actors. They just picking up trends and try to adapt to the legal environment, legal situation. and also work with superstructures like states and like economic sectors.
Some of those are verging on being the
Yeah,
superstructures.
yeah.
Palantir is verging on being a superstructure, and even though it is one company.
Well, the emergence of like companies like Facebook and Google is just it's not like particular it's not particular achievement. I think it's an achievement of an industry because Google appeared after few attempts to build a search engine like Yahoo and Alta Vista and Lycos and many others. Facebook appeared as an industry attempt to build social network, and all of them exist only because of advertisement industry existing before. So they just like changed a bit customer behavior in term of use of this advertisement and trust to the social media advertisement, right?
Yeah, the existence of Twitter and Facebook, and before that Google, they were allowed to come into being by a state of the AI advancing to that certain point. That's why other social networks didn't have the advanced algorithms required to generate a feed or generate certain other kinds of interactions. They didn't succeed? They were there before their time.
And yeah, the company like Microsoft and Google, they are much larger than the company. You can say this is different companies, like one company working on one market, another company working in another market. Like gaming market emerged a lot from the hardware possibility of hardware and software. It wasn't that widespread at the time of my childhood. So the question of network, this kind of network, this is like network under one brand, like Alphabet brand or Microsoft brand. It's still the network. It's still processors influencing and requiring memory and requiring hard drives and requiring software and requiring like operating systems and the applications in games, and this is a clearly network effect. So many demands from different parts pushing the whole thing, right? The whole structure. So Microsoft is just the name of some sector of economy, like some particular instances in the sector. It's not. If the network effect is if we completely remove Microsoft, they still will be the same industry there. So they just figure out how to monopolize it using PC platform at the time, and then like pretty much failed to monopolize in every other like aspect, servers or gaming. It's now much evenly distributed, right? So the Microsoft is just like current distribution of market share. That's it. There's no bigger place I see for Alphabet. Alphabet even, I think it's much more progressive in terms of it is occupying a lot more of markets, but there's still those markets, they still exist. They're not creating it. Let's come back to the future of humans, right? So I think the future of a human is long time over because we are modifying ourselves a lot with technology. So we are like hybrids right now. We're living longer and healthier in general because of these technologies.
Yeah, I think that can be overstated, just in the way that the ideas around radical life extension can be wrongly presented to people. Just since the Enlightenment era, in the last 200 years since the advent of the industrialization, we've seen basically a tripling of life expectancy around the world. That didn't derive from some kind of Faustian bargain, didn't derive from a deal with the devil that was made. It just came from dramatic differences in the marketplace and in labor and advancing technology, changing all aspects of human affairs. Similarly, something like a longevity escape velocity that doesn't it's not going to coincide with some sort of selling your soul. It's just going to come about rather naturally as people have access to these services through their public health service as the costs come down and these things come to market. And so to some degree, the assertion that we are a post-human, there's now into a generation of post-humans, I think it plays into kinds of fears and apocalyptic ideas that don't really describe the ways that these things are going to be impactful. It is true that I am becoming more of a cyborg than I was, and it is true that I expect that to be the case. But that doesn't mean all that much in terms of like my daily experience. I'm still going to be Ben, still going to be interacting with people, and still going to have the same kinds of concerns that I had before. So the assertion that we are post-human, I think for those people who we still want to be reaching out to with these ideas, I think that's a confusing assertion for them, and it doesn't necessarily describe the things that they need to be thinking about to become literate on these matters.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that the interference, the interconnection of current technological and scientific networks with the regular person is really low. If we take like 100,000s of apps in a smartphone, or if we have all the technology that we can make wearable and useful for yourself, we see very little of it, right? We see that regular persons, that they are applying a really, really small part of it on themselves. So what we can project is the same thing will happen in the future, but the possibility, the passiveness of these technologies will be increased. So I will use it even if I don't understand what it is.
Increasingly black box there.
Yeah, increasingly.
But that's always been the case. My grandfather had a pacemaker, and he didn't. It would have been quite mad for him to be, even though he was an electrical engineer, for him to obsess about the engineered qualities of the pacemaker before having the pacemaker. I used the microwave not 10 minutes before we started this conversation. I didn't make a grand study of the technology in the microwave before using it. We've had these kind of cyborgization elements, in the form of various medically necessary implants, pacemakers. It's a madman who looks at somebody like Muhammad Ali, the departed a boxer, had a brain-computer interface that was mediating a very serious degenerative neurological condition that he had, but only a schizophrenic would look at that implant and say that this is a feature of him being that he's now a robot because he has this. That's not the reality. He still was Muhammad Ali, unfortunately, and now he's deceased. So I think even just focusing on this side of things, it plays into certain kinds of magical thinking. It's not terribly relevant to human development or betterment of our species.
Yeah, in terms of who we are humans, transhumans, and posthumans, if you have like this limited scale of difference, that we're not posthumans. We look like a lot like humans, but the just the fact that we live like 40 to 50 years more in general makes the whole system a lot different in terms of knowledge accumulation, in terms of spending profile and stuff like this. So we were able to pay like 60% of all the medical expenses in the last 3 years of our lives. And previously it wasn't a lot. It wasn't possible at all because we didn't have that much accumulated resources, accumulated money, or things we can exchange. Some actives. So this is like this is a lot of the category that we exist as a humans right now is a lot of question of level you actually got conceptually, and what technology you buy for yourself, what technology is more important, and what is less. Like I don't see for myself medical technology in the end of my life very useful, because I actually like a cryonics company founder, and I see that if this process started and there is no actual technology to cure me, I will rather like give this money to cryonics company, to the resuscitation funds. But this is only like 10,000 people can decide this way on Earth, because their cryonics, they choose cryonics instead of be buried or cremated. And for them, it's like this answer is really like evident. Why should I be a disposable human? If I can extend my lifespan indefinitely, potentially with cryonics, right? So who am I? The future of humans is, I think it's pretty much over. It's only probably existing in some tribal environment somewhere in Africa or in Brazil, in Amazonia. And the humans are increasing. So that can be done, and what actual medicine don't do, because of a regulation, because of very principles that they used by doctors, like let's cure disease. It doesn't matter what bring this disease. Doesn't matter those years of parameter changing that brought this disease to the actual person, right? So what is also, this is back to the first question of what period of time you want to live, is also bringing you the current, let's say, meaning management questions, right? What is meaningful for that period of time, or that particular future I need, or what is not, in terms of spending structure, in terms of current social connection, in terms of your steps as a creator, as a technology creator, as a scientist. So what do you need to know about yourself in order to make cryonic suspension possible, right? Or more favorable, more probable, the resuscitation from cryonic suspension. And this is also the question of knowing of who you are, right? Like if we take the perspective on cryonics, what was the cryonics 100 years ago when cryobiology was introduced as a concept? Let's free all the all kind of biological objects, animal cells, and let's try to get it back. So it was, what was the understanding of life at that time? It was pretty much Pavlov's understanding, the physiological understanding, right? If we the conditional reflexes and stuff like this, then came a lot of
It appears we may have lost your feed for a second.
DNA.
Yeah, your feed lapsed for a second.
Mm-hmm. Is it okay now?
Yeah, I think yes.
So the very understanding of technology, like KrioRus technology, was moved with the understanding of what human is. In the beginning of the century, it was physiological human, the physiology, the conditional, unconditional reflexes, and then came like in the 40s, 50s, that came the supposition that there is some DNA structure, some mechanism. The understanding there is program, there is genes. It existed before, like in 20s, 10s, in breeding and stuff like this. But the mechanism and the prediction on a mechanism level, on a execution level, became only in 40s, 50s, 60s. Then in 80s, as we know, we find out how to manipulate particular genes, and actually in only in year 2003 we only have the different chromosomes, right? What it is in general, the place of particular genes on the chromosomes, they call structural genomics. So the understanding of year 2000 is still far from understanding of function, right? It was of function that particular genes influence on particular function of an organism, of a cell or tissue. And even if EEG as a technology was invented in 1910, 1920, somewhere like there, we cannot understand the whole without the mathematical models and computer models that actually analyze a lot of EEG connection to see and find correlates between EEG signal and some functions, some process in a psyche, in a consciousness. This advance of technology really shift the understanding of what human is. So right now, what is human is pretty much like mathematical function of neuron works that encoded by chemical processes and by electrical processes. So as such a system, as a kind of cybernetic system, but alive, that can reproduce and can grow and can like metabolize, it is really possible to simulate it. That's why a lot of neuronal models appeared during 50s, 60s, 70s, right? And that's why we still don't really know. We can't really like simulate our human mind because we're still missing some parts. Like we can simulate simple functions, particular functions with artificial neural network, but we cannot like simulate consciousness as a whole or complex cognitive function that we use for day-to-day activity.
You know, I was at Princeton Envision. Did a presentation there some weeks back, and also was lucky enough to judge a competition there for a number of presenters presenting on some perspective emerging technology. And one of them was a young man, Logan Thrasher Collins, whose presentation was about this, about basically reverse engineering in silico a particular entity, a fly brain, creating a fly brain wholly that's wholly recreated down to the individual neuron, and the amount of computing power that would be required for his project was, the amount of computing power that would be across an entire continent practically. But his proposal did include suggestions for the number of stacks of supercomputers that would be required, and it was entirely feasible, if not economical, his proposal. So this is I think another possible pathway to some kind of something rather like a recursive self-improving algorithm. If this thing was a conscious entity that was capable of evolving, a fair part of your piece describes moving away from a subjective timeline that we live in now. And certainly when you have artificial entities of this kind existing in silico that can evolve so quickly, and the meaning of time changes, and that has implications for all of us as well. Do you think that we talked to some degree about the decade of the 2020s and the extent to which we could see shock level 2 or shock level 3 type effects in this next 10 years? Do you think that we're looking at in that time frame creating reverse engineered entities, so to speak?
Yeah. What we are trying to, how can we categorize all these things, right? So there is technology in general that is not applied to humans, and there is technology that is personally applicable. So and there's a dual application tech. IT in general is not about humans, because it's about chips, memory, like hard drive, storage, networking, but it can be also applied to understand humans, like analyzing
so.
MRTs, giving prediction on some gene functions, finding targets for the drugs. So I think if we take this application, right, this particular point of view, we are able to sort meanings. We are able to manage meaning of application and meaning of actual funding of research and R&D. And this is what pretty much missing in the modern world. This meaning basis or value based companies and technology. I want really to invest in meanings, not in particular stocks or not in particular companies. So because of this, because of this possibility, if this possibility exists, I can invest in life extension company instead of investing in just health management company, right? Or healthcare, so-called healthcare, right? We understand pretty good that modern healthcare company are here to extract profits and manage disease instead of curing them. So this is not really what I'm interested in, or this is what I want to promote, or what I want to promote as example of good business practice, right? And because transhumanists have a lot of time actually to on Earth, right? It's not like short-term approach. We can like polish and develop abilities to actually introduce this meaning management practice or value management practice. Not every value is good for humans. Both on a state level, on a industry level, and on particular company level. So if we take a look, if we return to the point of effectiveness of our current economy or current like smart city or modern cities that we have, we can see that it is a lot more time-consuming for humans. So humans usually don't pay for the service and products with money. They pay for the lifetime. They pay with time they work. For some, it's a really small time because they have more money, but for some, it's much longer to have the same like basic goods to be paid. And everywhere else is like in Africa, it's even worse, or in poor countries. So this is possible because we understand. We don't understand the whole thing, the whole value thing. As we connect monetary value of humans with the actual value as a human as a structure, right? That's why we think the humans are disposable after they die. We can get rid of them, burn or bury or like drop the garbage in the landfill. The same as for humans, because we don't have widespread value. That is brain and human is actually a really complex and important thing to keep. With cryonics preservation or with structural preservation of the brain, doesn't matter. Like for me, it doesn't matter. Even if I on a standpoint of cryonics, I also see a great value in the companies that do brain scanning, the destructive brain scanning. They don't want to keep the brain functional. They want the structure to be copied in a computer environment, right? In a simulation environment. And this is this activity, my personal my personal choice of business that I need to do, came directly from my understanding of my value, that I'm so valuable. I just don't want to be destroyed or disposed just because my body is old and or some accident that stopped the critical functions. So this set of values actually is not reflected in economic structures or in let's say philosophical basis. We need to like regular person need to search for this basis, for this social structures that really imply this type of conversation like we do right now. If I turn on TV, I won't see nothing like this, right? Like I won't see any conversation like this for a long time. Maybe once a month we have some Hollywood movie touching, uploading question or cryonics question, but I need to search for it. I really.
And that lack of language to describe this in cross culturally, it's a little bit worse here in North America because we don't even have a political mandate for public health service, much less this idea that your brain is a system that has a lot of useful information, and to lose that information is an avoidable, very soon to be an avoidable situation. And this is one of the reasons that we have, Aubrey de Grey's death is trance. It's because of a lack of a language to describe this, a lack of this the public interest and acceptance of this set of ideas. And you mentioned films and such a moment ago. An interesting film that describes very directly this life extension concepts and a longevity escape velocity, a French series from that came out on Netflix some months ago. It's called Ad Vitam, and it describes a world where longevity escape velocity has been reached. And it's sort of a police procedural that describes investigation into a bioluddite terror cell, people who are against life extension, which is a rarity in this future time. But it's quite a good show. I recommend it. I highly recommend it. And I think that things like this do help to create that language that allows us to think in these terms. And that's an important thing. That is maybe the most important thing, not entertainment, but this, because we can't see that, we don't want to see this disconnect where the technology in terms of emerging biomedicine is there, but the political will or public interest in the subject is so non-existent that these things fall by the wayside, that this becomes a set of orphan technologies. And there's so many examples of things like this in the 20th century, things that could have been used but were not used. And some of those things are a little bit sad. But it'd be really sad if this were the case, where we don't see people adapting life extension technologies and generally accepting the idea that aging can be reversed because they lack the imagination or they lack the language to describe those things as a group.
Yeah, or the notions that like human brain is a computational and analytical system that have its own internal clock, internal frequency that it works. And actually the science must move to the increase of this frequency or this internal time, right, of a system. This type of narrative is non-existent in politics, right? But this is like what is bringing more time to the same system. Actually, we are not living in a time as a informational processing system. This is back to the, if we return to the definition of human, we are not living in time. We're living in images per second or operations per second. So you can see it on a slow-mo with your phone. While we're shooting slow-mo, this system is working much faster than the outside system, the internal system over smartphone. So it can capture a lot more information, and actually it is more potent in living a longer life right now. So if you remember Richard Feynman famous lecture from the 50s, there's a lot of space down there. So it's still, this notion is still unexistent on a political discourse, right? So let's bring nanotechnology that allow us do more with less, and do more with the things we actually cannot reach because of a sticky fingers problem, right? But what we even more don't see in politics here in politic conversation is, let's bring more time right now. Let's bring eternity now. Let's bring a lot of time in seconds, a lot of perception in seconds, much more perception. We have the notion of quality time. What it is? It's usually the quality perception, right? The more perception, we are relaxed that we can perceive more and enjoy this perception. and this discourse is existing too. So only small amount of countries actually have the departments that are occupied with quality of life and human happiness, and none of the countries occupied of maybe one or two, like Korea, are occupied with longevity, right? Biological longevity. But what we see is cybernetic system, the IT systems, the systems that have different architectures, like using DNA structure to build forms, or using quantum processes to process information. They are evolving much faster than any human, any possible biological structure in the past. So we have evolution of technological sectors and technological devices and technological parameters at the speed that is incomparable with any biological evolution. Maybe comparable with evolution of viruses. If they are really like separated. If we have a separation of function, the viruses are, because they are mass parallel, they can be compared. They adapt to the speed of antibiotics development. But this is only one small aspect of adaptation. The technological advancement, they have a large scale of parameters to adapt to actually increase and improve. This is back to the question of post-human future and transhuman future, that we actually can provide products like cryonic suspension, like digital immortality devices, like vlogging, wearable electronics, quantified biohacking, quantified self. A lot of this can jump over the actual generation of technology, because we will gonna need it later. Even if we cannot extend biological life, we can freeze a person, cryonically preserve a person to solve this problem later. And cryonics is one of the example of technology that is shock level 2 and 3. Even if we cannot actually run the software, we can back up it. Our inner brain software, right? We can back it up and understand how good it was backed up in structural terms and functional terms.
And that's
or any information about your psyche, about your like system model of psyche, or the pretty complex models that have, like Buddhists have, and psychology have. It can be used to reanimate the personality later after cryonics preservation. So this is type of projects and type of products and services you can concentrate to get ahead, like after the needed technology will appear.
Yes. And that does call back to some degree one of the comments from Paul Watson. He said, "Can you expand on your comment?" I made a comment. I said, "I'm more of a cyborg than I used to be." And there's in that distinction that you made a moment ago between the transhuman and the transhumanist. There's a very real sense in which I am a transhumanist, advocating for upgrading of the human form and so forth, and that is an aspiring cyborg more than an actual cyborg. But there are, of course, also very real senses in which we are using these technologies in many ways as cyborgs. And perhaps I'm echoing Elon Musk here in describing the ways in which we have social power, superpowers rather, in the form of the use of what is effectively telekinetic powers and the use of our advanced interfaces, smartphones and PCs and so forth. And also I have a digital version of myself, albeit rudimentary, in the form of my social media footprint, and also this increasingly complex interactions that I have with that profile in the form of my interactions with digital assistants and so forth. So I do regard that as a kind of first phase of cyborgization. And I'll also say, in answer to that question, that I'm able to do some other kinds of things like this that I haven't been able to do. I am, in about 1 month's time, going to be setting a Guinness World Record for the longest period of continuous augmented reality usage. I have an augmented reality device that I'll be using. And that is something that I think reflects this. And as we're all moving into this more continuous IoT type usage of these first phase cyborg technologies, I hope that this record will be quickly beaten. I hope that I won't hold this record for very long, because I hope that lots of other folks will be in a position to be beating and surpassing this record quite quickly. But I would encourage folks to check out benzion2020.com and be looking for updates on this exciting Guinness record that we'll be doing. And also other campaign events coming up, including a debate on March 5th at the Chicago Hilton with other candidates that we mentioned, Zoltan Istvan, a Republican challenger to Trump, Libertarian frontrunner, Howie Hawkins, the Green Party founder and Green presidential candidate. Also, the Libertarian candidate, John McAfee, has agreed to participate. And we're going to have a Democratic candidate there as well. So it looks to be an exciting first quarter for the United States Transhumanist Party and for Benzion 2020. I digress. Were there any other things that we wanted to describe as we're coming to the end of our hour in discussing the near future or discussing the metrics, the technology readiness level, these other aspects of the piece that we described in the past?
Yeah. The example of your VR stunt, VR trip is a good example because like VR is here for 20 years or 30 years. I had my first headset, if you remember, VFX One, like 20 years ago, 1998. But I don't see a lot of people wearing it. A lot of people using it on. As you said, the World Guinness record is like a little bit more than 1 month. It's like 40 days or so, right? So nobody did it for 40 days straight, and it's strange because we have 5G, 4G right now. We have
you broken up a little bit. I regret to say this. I'm not fully integrated with technology to the degree that I would like, and as a result, my device is getting low on charge. So I might have to leave the call in the next few minutes.
Okay. So yeah, we can finish with near future. Near future is not what is needed to be pursued because we will spend a lot of time in the future.
Yeah, I think that we should. I think that we should continue a second part of this webinar to address points, address more fully points 8, 9, 10, and 11.
Yeah, personal future, current readiness level of technology and yourself. Yeah, also like the things like cryonics is really fundamental for humans because it's not just the way to stop diseases, but also the way to get into some particular future or approach the future. It's kind of time machine for biological objects, one-way time machine. So what does it mean in general is we can choose the future that we need with cryonics. You can choose the future. And this means you can choose all the possibilities that future technology can bring to you. So if we have this kind of narrative, if you can like push this narrative on a national TV, on a political debate, it will be the precedent. Like right now, Yang is doing with Humanity First. That he is actually promoting the value of humans over the monetary value, and this.
And this is a very important 21st century development that we we have to some degree shifted, and even some very wealthy individuals have said this, that the definition of a billionaire, for example.
Yeah.
You cut out for a second.
I was
saying that
let's continue later.
Okay, yeah, that was an unrelated. I think there's some small network disruptions in the stream, so sometimes you are cutting out for a moment or two. But yes, I hope that our listeners will stay with us as we're able. We will reschedule a second part to continue these discussions. I hope. You still there? Okay, I'm still live. It appears Alexey has dropped out. So thank you, folks, for staying with us for this discussion. And please, you can reach out to me at benzion2020@gmail.com if you would like to continue this discussion of disruptive technologies and clearer ideas for thinking about futurism studies and its impact on the marketplace. I'll look forward to this second part of this event in the coming weeks. Thank you again, and have a good evening.